Hey everybody, and welcome back to the channel. It's your girl Lori, and I want to talk to you about responding versus reaction because this is an important one. I could probably do like 400 videos on this. So if you want me to do a longer podcast on it, let me know down here in the comments. But it is important that you really get that concept because think of a reaction, right? So you know what a reaction is, right? Somebody cuts you off, somebody says something to you, somebody does whatever, and you immediately go into a response mode, like, what are you doing? Listen, some of that's going to be a natural reaction. So you have to be cognizant of like, hey, I'm going to respond to this, not react to it. So like in the first example, somebody cuts you off and you're like, you get upset, maybe you flip them the bird, you do all of that. Yeah, that's because you're like, oh my God, you almost made me crash or whatever. That's just like a fleeting thought. But if you go chasing after the person, now you're going after response because you need it to be fairly justified why they shouldn't have done that, right? So that's a little dramatic. But if you're talking about people who, and this may be you or it might be people you know, think about people who are constantly in a reactive mode, not a responsive mode, a reactive mode. And again, could be you. So somebody, I don't know, somebody makes a comment and goes, they open up the refrigerator and they go, oh, I see you've got a different kind of milk. And you go, yeah? What? Yeah, I did. Okay. Okay. Or, oh, hey, did you send off that email? Yes, I sent off that email. Like, whoa, why is everything going into attack? See, your feeling of disrespect versus being disrespected are two different things. So just because you are having a bad day, you didn't get any sleep the night before, you had an argument with somebody, doesn't mean that you react onto other people. You don't get to dump your stuff on other people, right? Like, and that's an important piece of that because if you are constantly in a space of because you're having a bad day that you're going to dump it on everybody else or you're frustrated so you're going to be nasty and short-tempered with everyone, that's a you thing to process, right? And if somebody else is doing that to you, you can say, hey, I'm sorry, I don't allow myself to be spoken to that way. And then you remove yourself from the situation. Yes, this includes work. So if your boss comes at you, and I don't mean just they're a little aggressive, I mean, they are really like cutting you low. And you're just like, hey, I don't allow myself to be spoken to that way. Walk away. I don't care if it's your boss, I don't care who it is. So see, you have to be willing to do that, right? So that's if you're being sort of reacted towards, but then check yourself and you listen, people are going to inherently get on your nerves. I mean, it's just going to happen. I don't care how healed you are, how balanced you are, how processed you are, how many tools you have. You're still going to get irritated, but it's what do you do with that irritation? Do you sit there and take it home and sleep on it for 4.5 hours and go, why am I so irritated? Why am I so irritated? Is that what you're doing? Because you want to be careful of that. Because nobody, just because you feel some kind of way, doesn't mean that other people have to feel that too. That's the difference between reaction versus responsiveness, right? So when you respond to something, you don't want to do it out of emotion. See, reactions come from emotions. Responses do not. Responses like, okay, let me take a minute and process this. Because if not, you're going to do that knee jerk, well, you're not going to attack me. I'm going to come back after you to let you know that you can't attack me. Like, okay, now we're trying to see who's like bigger dog on the steps, right? And let them win the day. See, the biggest thing is you're trying to get in the last word. You're trying to get the other person to see it from your perspective. And sometimes that's just not going to happen. Let them win the day. 2 plus 2 is 97. Yep. Let them win the day. Go home or wherever you are, take some time, process it, think about what you want to say to articulate what your perspective is of it and what your side of the story is of it, and do so without the emotional attachment to it. Because when you're responding, you're not coming out of emotion. When you're responding, you're like, oh, okay, I see what they were saying. Because it also gives you the ability, when you take time, take a step back, it gives you the ability to maybe see things from a different perspective. Don't come back at somebody just because you feel attacked or you feel as though somebody said something incorrect or did something incorrect. Mm-mm. Because the reactionary piece of it will never get you heard. Oh, people will hear you, but they're just gonna be like, oh, they're at it again. Like, it's not gonna get your point across. And I know you want it to, but it's never gonna happen that way. Versus a response where you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I can actually see your point of that. I didn't say you had to align with it, but if you can't see things outside of your perspective, then you're going to live a very limited life because you're only doing it from your perspective. Just because you don't like what somebody's doing doesn't mean that it's wrong for them, right? So you can say, "Oh, okay, wow, I see how you could feel that way. That was definitely not my intentions. Sorry about that." But I mean, then you don't have to say sorry. You can just say, "Hey, that wasn't my intention. So this is where I was coming from." Well, now you're doing so with, you have your facts, you have, well, the facts, if they're real facts, they don't come with emotion, but you have your facts, you have your perceptions, you have your feelings behind it. And now you're doing so where you're not seeming like you're attacking someone or that you're trying to defend yourself. Because I don't care what anybody tells you, and people will say, "Oh, well, if you don't defend yourself, you must be guilty." No, or you must be weak. No, no, as long as you know your own truth, nobody else has to deal with it. That's the important piece of it. That does come with self love, that does come with self esteem, that does come with self acceptance, all things for you to work on, right? And that's great. You can also gauge where you are in your healing based on how offended you get, right? If you feel like everybody offends you, and I don't mean like on a global scale when we're talking race relations, that's not what I mean. If you feel as though somebody slighted you because they made you feel a certain way, your feelings are not facts, and I will stand on that, and that is a huge foundation for me. They can be your perspective, but you're not willing to see it from a different perspective. So you automatically feel the need to defend. You want to be careful of that because, again, you're never going to get your point across because people will do a few different things. They're either just going to block you completely, like, okay, whatever, or they're just going to be like, oh, you're at it again. But see, you have to understand people are going to have those perspectives and the way they do things, regardless if you're reactive or responsive. But at least by responding, and sometimes that doesn't mean that you respond the next day. Sometimes you sit on, now you don't wait 10 years and then turn around and go, okay, I'm ready to talk to you about this thing that happened in 1943. Like, no, you don't want to do that much, but you definitely want to keep it to where you have to keep in mind, you have to take your ego, because your ego goes into reaction mode too, right? It's trauma response, but it's also ego. Your ego says, I got to be right, or I got to have my word said, or this is what it is for me. And remember the rule of thumb, you can be happy or you can be right. Cannot be both. Okay, so that's important for you to get. So, and right is only relevant to you. Stop thinking of right and wrong in these black and white formats, because the black and white formats will definitely be detrimental to you. So you want to be careful of that, because when you're living in that black and white space, that's where you're going to remain. And then you're only ever going to see things as always and never, which is a cognitive distortion. Always, never, big things. God, do this full scale or nothing at all. No, black and white thinking, cognitive distortion. So the next time you feel yourself, and like I said, there's going to be things that, it's not like you can't plan for everything, but before you go into reaction, take a step back. And you might have to just let them have the last word for the day. Think about it, go home and process it. But having the last word from a reactionary standpoint does not mean that it's a win for you. It just means the person's like, fine, whatever. You don't want that. You want somebody who's going to be able to actually listen, not change, but just listen to what you're saying. They are not going to listen to you in a reactive format. And if people are constantly coming at you, right, that's where you have to go, I don't allow myself to be spoken to that way. Be willing to do the block. Be willing to do the walk away. Yes, even at work. Yes, even with your parents. You have to be willing to get uncomfortable. You have to be willing for people to get a little upset with you. Not on purpose, but they just inherently will. When they can't get their way, so to speak, that's going to continue to happen. And that's the part I want you to understand and I want you to get to, is to sit and be in that space of saying, okay, I'm gonna let them win. They're not winning. It's not a race. No one's winning. They just got the last word for the day. Let them have it. Because then you can listen, and maybe there's something that is in there that you don't want to know about yourself that maybe you should. But you got to remember, a reaction comes from emotion and a response does not. You can still get your point across, but in a response, you're not coming off unstable or erratic. So the next time that happens, your little call to action there is check yourself, remove yourself from the situation. if you need to. If you need that time, take that time. Think about it, process it, breathe, right? And then you're able to articulate it. But don't do so out of emotion and anger, because it's just never going to give you the outcome that you're seeking.